I know a lot about cars, you know a lot about cars, but how many old myths did you believe in and not realize that they were fake until recently? It's a lot less common now thanks to the power of the internet and all of us having a lot more information than we used to, but there's still a lot of really weird car myths floating around that just flat out aren't true. So I took it upon myself to dig into these obscure topics and create a list of the most ridiculous car myths. Some of these are related to fueling, legalities, electronics, and a lot more. But before we get into it, drop a comment down below. Let me know what things you believed in for the longest time that are related to cars that actually wasn't true. The first thing I want to get into is something I still see in meme form to this day on Facebook and Instagram, and that's that turning off your air conditioning will make your car faster, especially in underpowered cars, normally 4-cylinder cars, where any change in power is really noticeable, for a stock Miata, for example. But the thing is, turning off your AC has zero effect on how much power your car outputs. I know it might not sound true, but stick with me for a second. Your AC compressor is driven by the accessory belt of your engine, and therefore takes power away from the engine in order to drive the compressor. With that in mind, you'd think that taking power from the engine to drive the AC compressor would make your car slower. But automotive manufacturers have thought this through long ago and came up with a simple solution, which is to disengage the AC compressor at full throttle. I can't verify that this is the case for 100% of modern cars, but it's safe to say that nearly all modern cars will disengage the AC compressor at full throttle. If you're asking the engine to deliver all the power that it has, then it should deliver that. And temporarily disabling something like the AC compressor simply makes sense if you want your engine to deliver full power. Another thing to note is that modern AC compressors are way more power efficient than old AC compressors. So something like a 2009 truck is going to have a much more efficient AC compressor that's only going to pull maybe 1 or 2 horsepower compared to something like a 1989 car where it could be pulling 4, 5, 6, 7 horsepower. So yes, your 1990 shitbox probably does feel slower when the AC is on, and it is actually a little bit slower at part throttle. But when it comes time to go full throttle, it should disengage your AC compressor and the car will be just as fast whether the AC is on or off. The next myth, which has actually died out for the most part, is the idea that you absolutely have to change your oil every 3,000 miles, when in fact with modern oils, you can push it way past that. Modern oils break down much less than old school oils do. They have much better lubricity, much better cleaning properties, and just flat out do not need to be changed every 3,000 miles. The only application where this would likely remain true is something like a very high performance racing application where you're going to have a lot more metal shavings in your oil, especially something like drifting or road course racing where you're going to have a lot more high G situations where your oil could get pulled away from the pickup tube. Theoretically, it shouldn't because there should be things in place such as a dry sump system to prevent that. But regardless, really high performance racing applications, it makes sense to change your oil more often. But for a road car, totally not necessary. I do want to say though that this isn't just a black and white thing. Even things such as the fuel that you use can change this, as different fuels can break down your oil faster than others. But in the majority of applications, there's nothing wrong with pushing your oil change out to 5,000 miles, 10,000 miles, or even more in some cases. Seriously, if you don't believe me, run one 10,000 mile oil interval on your car and send in your oil for analysis after it's changed. It'll likely come back that the oil was still providing excellent lubrication, cleaning, and the oil contained acceptable levels of metal shavings. I've seen it happen firsthand, even in relatively high performance applications, such as a Ford Focus ST. That being said, if you're in a very old clapped out car, it's probably better to stick on the safe side and stick with slightly more frequent oil changes. But for anything modern, using a modern oil, 5 and 10,000 mile oil changes are perfectly acceptable. And before you go running to the comments about lube techs saying this or your mechanic saying this or that, remember that they're making money off of your oil changes, so they're not always going to be inclined to tell you to get your oil changed less often. The next myth that I see a lot is that higher octane fuels make more power than lower octane fuels. Part of this is the way that fueling companies market their product, but the truth is actually the direct opposite. Lower octane fuels produce more power than higher octane fuels. And before you go running to the comments, just give me a second to explain. It'll make sense. The octane rating itself is just a rating on the fuel's combustion predictability and likelihood to pre-detonate, which is igniting from heat and pressure rather than the spark plug. More specifically, the octane rating is actually a measurement of the ratio between the fuel's octane, which is a compound called isooctane and another compound called heptane. So in the case of 93 octane fuel, we're looking at 93% isooctane and 7% heptane. But the thing is, heptane is more chemically energetic than isooctane, but it's also less stable and predictable. With that in mind, a fuel containing more heptane will actually be more chemically powerful than a fuel containing less heptane. Therefore, 91 octane is more chemically powerful than 93 octane, and as such, it will produce more power. But this is assuming that we're testing 91 versus 93 on the same car on the same day in the same conditions with no changes to the tuning at all. And besides that, the difference in power output between these two is likely under 1 horsepower depending on the size of your engine, so it's really not something you'd ever even feel or notice. But with modern cars, we have modern electronics, and with that comes an ECU and NOx sensors. And if your engine is not detecting NOx, so you just filled up your car with 93 octane, you go down the road, your car's not detecting knock, which means it's safe to advance the ignition timing more because it's not detecting knock, which means no pre-detonation. So it can advance your ignition timing a little bit more safely. When it does that, you are going to make significantly more power because ignition timing has a huge impact on the power output of the car. And in boosted applications, your car will increase the boost pressure accordingly. So since 93 is more stable than 91, your ECU will adjust accordingly, and 93 octane will make more power than 91 octane when the car adjusts accordingly. But if it does not, 91 will actually make more power than 93. And that actually takes me to a piggyback off of that myth, which is that ethanol fuels, such as E85, that lots of people like to run in boosted cars, make more power. And again, this isn't true for nearly the exact same reason, which is that ethanol is actually very low on energy density as compared to gasoline, but it's much more stable, and therefore you can run more boost and more ignition timing to make more power. But the fuel itself isn't the thing making more power. In fact, the energy density difference from high ethanol content gas compared to low ethanol content gas is so extreme that many boosted cars have to run larger injectors with more powerful fuel pumps to keep up with the demand, because with less energy density, you need more of the fuel itself to match standard gasoline. Personally, this next myth is something that I've quite literally never heard of, but after looking around online, it seems like a lot of people heard this as kids growing up. And that's that if you put your car battery on the floor, so you're changing your car battery, you put it on the floor, and more specifically, you put it on concrete, all the energy will drain out of the battery. And I will say this actually used to be true, but with modern technology, we've gotten modern materials and it's no longer the case. Batteries today are encased in plastic or hard rubber, which significantly reduces any energy waste, but batteries do naturally self-discharge over time. But this is due to an internal process, not the type of material on which the battery is sitting on. Before we had modern battery casings, energy could and did get drawn through the casing and into the floor. But thankfully, this is no longer the case. Yet again, we've got another super weird myth that I've personally never heard of, and that's a cheap and easy way to save cost on fueling. And that's if you fuel up in the morning, it'll be cheaper than fueling up at night. And not because the price changes, because of the ambient temperature. And this whole idea revolves around the myth that ambient temperatures are cooler in the morning, so the gasoline is supposed to be more dense because it is also cooler. In theory, this could actually be true, but there's a few things that make it a myth. One, the tank holding the gasoline underground isn't all that sensitive to outside temperature fluctuations throughout the day, and the actual difference in gasoline density from say 60 degrees Fahrenheit to 50 degrees Fahrenheit is so small that it wouldn't even be a measurable difference at the pump. So while the science of this idea actually does work in theory, in reality, the temperature fluctuations of gasoline at the pump are very, very small. And because of this, you'll see no measurable difference. So sleep in a little bit, because getting up early to get your gas a little bit cheaper is a complete myth. The next myth is something that I'm pretty sure will never actually fully die because of how different engines and different exhaust systems work. But this is the myth that you need some amount of back pressure in your 4-stroke engine in order to produce peak power, and that zero back pressure is actually bad for your engine. Right off the bat though, this isn't fully true. And a good example of this is top fuel cars, which have massive engines producing upwards of 11,000 horsepower. And these guys are concerned with making loads of power, as much power as possible. So if back pressure was super important to power output, why do high horsepower drag cars use open header exhaust systems? I do think it's worth noting though, that excessively large exhaust piping or a poorly designed exhaust system can reduce exhaust scavenging, which can result in a decrease in total flow and ultimately less power. When an exhaust pulse comes through the exhaust system, it creates a low pressure area behind it. With a good design, this low pressure area can help pull the following exhaust pulses out. This is where the idea that zero back pressure can reduce scavenging effectiveness, but this is also very dependent on the application and the design of the exhaust system. It's certainly not a black and white myth, as there is some truth to back pressure affecting exhaust scavenging effectiveness, and the scavenging ultimately affecting the power output of the vehicle. I will say this can be a little bit different for 2-stroke vehicles, but for 4-stroke vehicles, it's really not the case. Now, the next two myths are something I believed for the longest time growing up as a kid, and you probably did too, and that's two laws regarding when you're driving. The first one being that you cannot have your interior dome lights on while you are driving, and that you cannot change lanes in an intersection. I would like to preface this by saying that every single state is different, so check with your local laws before trying any of this stuff. But for this, I'll be referencing Arizona laws where I live. For the first one though, I can't even tell you how many times I needed to turn on the dome light as a kid, and my parents would tell me that it's illegal and all these things, but yeah, according to Arizona law, that's not the case. And more than likely, most parents are just telling their kids this, that it's illegal, to stop them from doing it, because the reflection on the windshield can actually be pretty distracting when you're driving, but it is actually legal. Now the second one, changing lanes in an intersection, I heard that a long time ago as a kid in my friend's mom's car as we were going somewhere, and I never thought anything of it until quite literally when I was writing this video script. And yet again, according to Arizona law, there is literally nothing prohibiting lane changes in an intersection. That being said, it's still not a great idea since the lack of lane lines can make it hard to identify if a car is changing lanes, which can be pretty dangerous at an intersection where there's tons of cars, pedestrians, and people trying to turn right, and so on. Now, the next myth that I've heard a bunch of is that ethanol is super corrosive compared to gasoline and it'll tear apart your car's fuel system, and on and on and on and on. And while there is a little bit of truth to this, especially when ethanol started getting added to all gasoline and pretty much all gas at every single pump turned into E10, it's not exactly the ethanol that's corrosive and destroying your fuel system. In some applications, ethanol can corrode and dry out rubber and plastic gaskets, but that's generally on older vehicles and not something we see on new cars, as manufacturers started using different materials in their gaskets to prevent this from happening when E10 became the standard. The bigger issue is that ethanol attracts water, and when ethanol and water get together, you create a bacteria known as Acetobacter, which can then excrete acetic acid, which is very corrosive. But this only happens if your vehicle has been sitting for a very long time, such as a motorcycle or a lawnmower or a project car that's been sitting on jack stands in your driveway for months on end. So while ethanol isn't great for older vehicles with those old style rubber gaskets and seals, up to E15 is approved on all vehicles 2001 and newer. So plain and simple, low amounts of ethanol such as E10 or E15 are totally fine for newer vehicles. But what about something a little bit more performance oriented, such as E54 or E85? And that's where things can differ. As you go up in ethanol content, it gets harder and harder and harder to remove the water content completely, which can result in corrosion. So as far as ethanol being corrosive, this is partially true because of the water content, but for the most part, it isn't something to worry about. If you're driving an older car, it is a good idea to replace your fuel system parts with newer rubbers and materials that won't die when exposed to ethanol fuel. Now this next myth that I've heard a bunch, and it mostly comes from Ford guys, and that is that the GM LS is a direct copy of the Ford Windsor, and that GM basically just took the Windsor, changed a few tiny things, and just called it the GM LS and just ripped off all this stuff, and they hired Ford engineers and on and on and on. A lot of this comes from guys who want everyone to think that Ford is better than GM, and any shade that they can throw at the LS and LT will somehow make the Coyote look better. But the thing is, with an overhead valve V8 engine, there's really not that many designs you can go with on the head. And I will say, certain LS heads can in fact bolt onto small block Ford Windsors with almost no modifications. But just because they easily bolt on doesn't mean that they work at all. The valve orientation on the heads are different, the oil passages are different, the coolant passages are different, the valve stems are thinner and longer in length, and a lot more. Are the port layouts and the head bolt patterns similar? Sure. Is the deep skirt block with cross-bolted main caps reminiscent of Ford's wide block? Yes. Did they blatantly copy the Windsor engine? No. Does the LS have similar features to the Windsor engine? Yes. But that doesn't mean that they straight up copied it. If Ford found great ways to design the heads for flow and cooling, who's to say that GM didn't do their own R&D and come to similar conclusions? At the end of the day, there are only so many ways to design an overhead valve V8 engine. So just because the LS has some similar features to the Windsor doesn't make it a ripoff or that GM just straight up copied it. And even if they did, you'd be crazy to think that manufacturers across the automotive landscape don't spy on each other's work and start the base of their R&D on another company's work. This happens all across the automotive industry, from vehicle manufacturers to aftermarket parts manufacturers. There's an old saying that I've heard floating around, which is that R&D is not research and development, it's ripoff and design. Is it plausible that GM started the development of the LS with a Ford Windsor base? Definitely. In fact, I'd say that they probably did. They recognized a good product that Ford had delivered, and they thought that they could make it even better with their own work. So they took that product and made it even better. Does it make it a ripoff of the Windsor engine or the fact that GM can't design their own stuff? No, not at all, because clearly it's not a Windsor engine. There's a reason a 4.8 Vortec can make significantly more power than a 5-liter small block Ford naturally aspirated, and that's that LS motors have significantly better flowing heads. If it was the case that it was just a direct ripoff, they'd make similar power outputs, but it's not even close. The last myth is something that you've heard from your friends, you've heard from your family, you've heard it around car shows, and it's even something that you're guilty of spreading yourself. And I know this one's gonna hurt for a lot of you. This one really, really hurts. And that's the myth that your car is actually fast. So that's our short list of common car myths that you've probably heard over the years. Be sure to drop a comment down below. Let me know how many of these you've believed for a really, really long time. Most of these I figured out a really long time ago, but when it comes to legalities, there's a lot of stuff that I still believe to this day that I find out regularly was not true. So be sure to drop a comment down below. Let me know what you just found out wasn't true. While you're down there, get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos. Check out some of the other stuff on the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.